people's destiny is in our sights. America's future is in our hands, and the best is yet to come.
Congressional correspondent for the Washington Post, and you're here watching our Washington Post Live continuing coverage of the Republican National Convention, which kicks off sort of today in all parts of the country. Down in Charlotte, there is actual business happening, and President Trump is finding ways to make news. Our first guest this afternoon is Senator Roy Blunt, Republican of Missouri. He is a critical person on many levels. He is the number 4 ranking member of leadership. He is also chair of the Senate Rules Committee, which sometimes is kind of described as a sleepy backwater, but boy, it is a hotbed of really interesting issues, which we'll get to, including election security, postal service mail issues about how to secure elections. And he is a key member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which has had a lot of role in the COVID relief legislation that we've had up to $3 trillion of rescue packages so far, and there's still more possibly to come. But welcome aboard, Senator Blunt. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Paul. Great to be with you. Thanks for taking time with me today.
Oh yeah. Well, listen. First of all, the extra bonus is that he is joining us from Charlotte in North Carolina, where he was on hand today for the kickoff roll call of the states and such. So just give us your overview of sort of what you have actually seen personally so far, sort of what you thought as you were watching the DNC last week, which had this completely virtual setup, and now you're there in Charlotte. What's the vibe like? What's it feel like? And is this the future, or is this the past?
Well, I sort of wondered the same thing, Paul. I was wondering as I watched last week, and as I was here today, watching the roll call, seeing the vice president come down, the president come down, I kept wondering, is this the oddest convention ever, or is this more like conventions are going to be in the future? The combination of virtual things happening with another kind of setting that maybe is an immediate setting, and we haven't had really a contested convention in the United States for a long time, so the purpose of meeting to determine the nominee hasn't been part of the process in a long time, and so we've seen these virtual conventions. I think the Democratic convention last week was very much focused on let's make this a personality contest between Vice President Biden and President Trump. And I think the convention here with the president's comments today that will, I think, go through the same pattern this week is this election is actually about something rather than which of these two people you may like the best, as opposed to which of these two people are going to address the issues that need to be dealt with in the future. The vice president got a lot of credit last week, or a lot of attention, saying characters on the ballot. I think President Trump's going to talk, as he did today, about a whole list of other things that are on the ballot: prosperity, security, the opportunity to get back to the economy. That he'll want to talk about was the economy that really had dramatically moved forward in the first 3 years of this administration, to be impacted in an unanticipated way by what happened with the COVID-19 virus. And I think the president is going to do everything he can to be sure people believe that there are lots of things on the ballot. And this is more than just a choice of two different personalities. It's a choice of two different futures.
But you say that, and one of the things that would happen in the earliest phase of a normal convention is the adoption of the platform. And the platform traditionally is thought of as the policy proposals that a party stands for. And you folks didn't even come up with any platform. You just kind of rubber stamped the old one. I mean, is there really any sort of meat on the bones policy that this president is really pushing? What is his second term agenda, if you can think of what it is? I'll be honest, I'm not.
I think he would say that he had a lot of impact on the platform 4 years ago, and the second term agenda is more of the same. If you liked what you were seeing before February or so of this year, you're going to like what happens in the future. He's going to be talking about regulation, about tax policy, the growth. He's going to have Tim Scott talking about opportunity zones and how you reach out to communities that have been left behind in some way, and areas in communities that have been left behind in some way in the economic growth we were beginning to see. And so it's not just old, new boss, same as the old boss. It's here was the 2016 platform. Here's what we want to talk about, which is what we have done. If the president's going to be saying, here's what we've done to move forward on those issues. And on the regulatory front, he's made a big difference certainly if you look at the courts, a big difference. And if you look at the economy, you can say, as the Democrats will, this is somehow a continuation of the Obama economy. I don't think the facts bear that out. And I think one question might be, were you better in January of this year than you were 3 years ago or 4 years ago? And almost every American, if they look at that question, would say we absolutely were better off, and we'd like to get back to an America that has that kind of economy and that kind of opportunity.
Now, I understand that because in January and February, the economy was doing fine. But how do you can't ignore the last 5 months. The race has definitely seemed to change. How does, what sort of discipline does he need to display to try to hammer home those issues that you're talking about? I mean, you can't just ignore what has happened in the last 4 to 5 months, just both in terms of the health crisis and the economic crisis. I think that's foremost on people's minds, isn't it?
Well, I think that's critically important. I think those two things are going to be the things people are voting on. And in areas where they're confused about those things, the candidates are going to do everything they can to try to eliminate that confusion and say, no, this is the critical moment, not the other. And I think the president has to point out and should be able to point out effectively that nobody anticipated what would happen, the impact of the COVID virus. It was different than anybody thought. The long-term impact, different than thought. The break that every person guessed who had looked at these things in the past that we'd have in the summer didn't happen. Turned out to be much more highly contagious than other things we had dealt with. And this will require some analysis of how the Obama-Biden administration dealt with the H1N1, and they didn't deal with it very well. If you look back at what happened and what the president himself was saying, President Obama was saying right then, even though it had been turned over to Biden, the COVID effort is been an incredible effort. It's almost like we're reading the book while we're writing the book, or we're trying to build the plane while we're building the plane. And if the president's initiatives pay off in areas like testing and therapeutics and vaccine, where with warp speed or with the Shark Tank and testing, something that Senator Alexander and I spent a lot of time encouraging, we'll have a better way to respond to a pandemic in every future case than anyone's had before. And there's still some of this to be done. We're 75 days away from the election. In the world that we've lived in the last 4 years, a lot happens every 75 days. And I think there'll be a lot of new information for voters to look at between now and Election Day.
Well, how does he make the case? President Trump has rallied his base in ways that almost no president of our lifetime has. He really has just a really strong allegiance with that base. How does he try to branch out and grow to appeal to swing voters how much of the convention is really focusing on people like your constituents from St. Louis who are going to appear at the convention, who pulled guns out in the middle of the protest march? It seems like there's a focus on culture war issues in a lot of what is going to happen in the next 4 nights? And does that really appeal to swing voters that he needs in places like outside Philadelphia, outside Milwaukee, and in Michigan?
Well, I think the president's always been a little bit hard to poll on issues like that. What are people going to be thinking about as they see continued the chaos in some of our cities? What are they going to be thinking about when they see demonstrations that they support? Along with me, almost 3/4 of Americans supported the protests that occurred after the George Floyd killing. But 3/4 of Americans also were not supportive of the chaos that sometimes surrounded those protests, often with different people, sometimes with the same people, and how people feel about that, how they feel about the defunding of the police. And the Democrats can say all they want to that, no, we're not for that. We've never been for that. But they've said it, and they're going to have to own part of that. I don't know exactly how any of that will poll between now and Election Day, but I think some of the groups that the president has had problems with, highly educated people living in suburban communities, for instance, those are clearly troublesome areas for Republicans in the last 2 or 3 years. But there are also areas where people are concerned about safety and security. We'll just have to see how the president connects on those issues, and whether Vice President Biden can do a job of convincing people that there's going to be solutions to those problems if he's elected as well.
Okay. Let me ask you really a parochial Missouri question. I'm old enough, I've got the gray hair now to remember Missouri used to be just a real battleground state. In 2000, Bush Gore fought furiously for Missouri. You had that incredible Senate race in 2000 there. And as recently as 2016, you had a Democratic governor. But in 2016, it broke hard for Trump, and you won re-election. Is Missouri ever going to be really competitive again?
I don't know. Certainly it's changed. When I was elected statewide the first time, when I was elected Secretary of State, I was the first Republican that had won that office in 52 years. And that was very much the point we were at a couple of decades ago. Even in 2016, the only statewide elected Republicans were the lieutenant governor and me. And 2016 saw a big change. A lot of people that frankly had never voted for Republicans before looked at candidate Trump. They liked what he had to say, and it was a significant changing election. In the Obama election, the first Obama election, that was also a hard-fought election, and then after that, not so much. Obama didn't try as hard in Missouri in 16 as he did, or in 12 rather, as he did in 8. And we seem to have broken that almost 100 years of virtually a perfect record of voting for the winner in presidential elections and transitioning very slowly from a Democrat state to a state that now appears to be much more Republican and maybe likely to be that way for a while, Paul.
What was it like? You're from a more, what we call traditional Republican background. And what is it like campaigning on the same ticket as Donald Trump? You did it 4 years ago, and you stuck with him. There were some of your colleagues, especially after the Access Hollywood tape came out, some abandoned Trump, and you stuck with him. What is it like trying to run on the same ticket with this larger-than-life personality?
Well, he is that. And he has an impact on people and crowds like no politician I've seen before. There's almost a kinetic energy that develops. I saw it happen again here this morning between the 400 or 500 people that were at Charlotte and him. They moved up in a very socially distanced event. They moved up pretty close, and you could tell that he was enjoying that and connecting with them in ways that most politicians don't. I think to my colleagues, my recommendation would be just remember you actually understand your state better than anybody else does that's involved in this, better than the National Republican Party, better than the president. Doesn't mean the president's not going to run well, but it does mean that in the states where we can still win states that the president doesn't carry. And you know, right now we're worried about some states we think the president won't carry that have a Republican senator, some states that the president will carry but still have a Republican senator in a competitive race. And I think there's a lot of focus on the importance of Republicans keeping the Senate. I think that's going to happen. And these candidates need to be able to explain how they understand their state better than anybody else does, and how they're going to represent their state in ways that the people that they get to work for would feel good about. So I think you can be part of a greater Republican movement and still be part of identifying as an individual who understands your state and wants to represent that state in the Congress, or wants to represent that state as governor. And politicians have been doing that pretty vigorously since the 1950s, and I think we'll figure that out this time as well.
Okay, you referenced this earlier. Your first statewide office was Secretary of State. That is the person who is in charge of protecting and overseeing elections. If you were a Secretary of State right now, would you feel that this election is safe and secure, both in terms of, you know, meddling, foreign meddling? Intelligence reports seem to suggest that they're still trying to do that. Would you feel safe on that front? And what would you be doing? Would you, in terms of mail balloting, and how would you handle that?
Well, I'm on the Intelligence Committee as well, and taking that background to the Intelligence Committee, I hope has put me in the middle of these discussions as to what we need to do to help be sure that we have the securest elections we could possibly have. One thing I'd know for sure, if I was the Secretary of State in a state where you're the chief election official this year as opposed to 4 years ago, the one thing I'd absolutely be sure of is I have a lot more access to federal assistance than I had before, that the federal government has worked harder than it had before to develop a sense of communication and trust. I've monitored that very carefully in the Intelligence Committee, and all my colleagues have been updated with some frequency by the various groups that have been reaching out to the states. Also, by the way, we've developed a fairly aggressive ability that President Obama didn't allow, to have a offensive strategy in cyber war as well as a defensive strategy. So in 2018, you know, the federal government did some things to shut down groups that were trying to infiltrate our election systems or to put out information that we clearly understood was not correct. They're going to be doing that again. But I think state officials feel a much greater level of support than they have before. On the election security side, I think our elections are much more secure than they were 4 years ago or 4 years before that. And on the mail-in voting side, I have had a lot of experience with this. And like every other election official, state or local, I've seen ballots come in days after the election and days after they legally could be counted. And that is just part of the process. It's part of the reason, Paul, the best place to cast a ballot with the most security and the likelihood it will for sure be counted is at a polling place on election day. They know you, you know them, you verified that you're a voter that's eligible to vote in that polling place. You have all the information available to every voter. The campaign has played its way out, and you see that ballot go into the ballot box. you are virtually 100% sure that that ballot is going to be counted that night. There are all kinds of stories now, as more people have voted by mail this year, that a problem that was always a problem is just bigger because more people are voting by mail. And so the encouragement to get that ballot in the mail early, to don't wait until the day before the election and just hope and pray it gets there by whatever the deadline for your state is, it could still be counted. And we're going to have some likely ballots not counted, as we always do. But because you're going to have more people vote by mail, the way to minimize problems of your ballot being counted is don't wait too late to send that ballot out. The president's working hard to try to draw a distinction between a ballot you ask for, that could be a traditional absentee ballot, or even in a vote by mail state where you have to ask for a ballot, as opposed to a ballot they just send you. And there's also a lot of information out now about how many of those ballots that get sent out come back with the information that that person doesn't live there anymore. But we want to be sure that people who vote at their polling place feel good about their vote being counted, and that people who vote by mail also feel like that their ballot has the best chance possible to be part of deciding who wins these elections this year.
But then isn't there some sort of need for more funds for either the states and localities to keep open polling places? Because some of the stories out of the primaries were that there were fewer and fewer polling places that were open out of the fear of coronavirus and people not wanting to wait in long lines, and then they closed down polling places, and then that created long lines. Is there not some sort of need for additional funding, both for the Postal Service and for localities, to carry out an election safely?
Well, I think there is. Now, the states as of March of this year had about $800 million unspent, some of which had been sitting in their accounts since 2002 in the case of some states. So there's some money out there. Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota and I have been working on this together to try to come up with a way to see that states have the funding they need. Part of that is the ability to have more flexibility of spending the money you already have, a smaller match, greater flexibility in what you can spend that money for. And part of it is to have money that is in addition to that 800 billion or whatever percentage of that is still left, that the 800 million or whatever percentage of that that's still left that the states have. I think the president's negotiators have offered a couple of $100 million. The Senate and House Republicans have legislation that says they'd like to see another 400 million go to the states. But let me say this, with 75 or so days left, the money becomes less helpful the longer we wait to get it to the states. And I'd like to see it part of a package that would see that the states got money. In terms of the post office, as I said, well, I'm supportive of legislation that Senator Collins and Senator Feinstein have put together, where the post office over the next foreseeable period of time would get up to $25 million. But let's be truthful about this. The vote in the House this weekend, the idea that $25 million could somehow be spent in a way that would save the post office in this election is just not reasonable. The post office has a balance that's been established by the Postmaster General. They're willing to use that $15 billion balance or so they already have between now and Election Day and focus on first-class mail and especially on ballots. But in the long term, we need to do some things that make the post office work better than it's working now. I've long been part of that. Senator Collins has long been an advocate of that, and we need to do that. But I think the postal issue has been blown way out of proportion. Drop boxes that don't have mail in them don't need to be checked every day, which is why the last Postmaster General said, we're going to look at these blue boxes, and if they don't get mail, we're not going to have somebody go by every single day and check and see if they have mail. We're going to use our efforts in a greater way to be sure that the mail gets to people when it needs to get to people. And so good management practices are a fine thing, but right now assuring people that the Postal Service is going to work for them and for this election process for people who need to vote by mail is an important message for the Congress to send. But to try to scare people into thinking the post office can't do its job or won't do its job is a huge disservice to the people that work for the post office and, frankly, to those of us the post office serves.
Okay, another issue that is before the Senate Rules Committee that you've been working on is potentially having COVID testing for senators, for members of Congress and staff inside the building to try and do what some schools and colleges are doing and businesses. Is there any update on that?
Well, I think testing is a critically important part to getting back to school and getting back to work. And I think we could lead in that in a significant way. One of the reasons I wanted to come to Charlotte was to see what they were doing here at this convention, where I think every delegate, I think everybody that went into the convention hall had a test. I know I had one. I think everybody had a test while they were here, a quick response test that took less than 15 minutes to get an answer to. There was a vital circle effort here where the delegates actually had a monitor that kind of, if they wound up at some point getting COVID, they knew what other delegates they had been close to during the time they were here. I thought the convention did a very good job. People had their mask on, they kept their mask on, and unless they were speaking. And I thought the convention did a good job. I think the Senate can and should do a better job on this, and we're continuing to look for a way. In some ways, the Senate, every time we come back, is like the people that came to this convention. People that come from all over the country, let's say the Congress generally, 535 people go out all over the country, almost all of them on a plane going one way and a plane going back, many of them 2 planes going one way and 2 planes coming back. It's almost a perfect petri dish for how you'd try to expand a virus if you wanted to come up with a perfect way to do it. I think we've been pretty careful under the rules committees established in the Senate for mask and distancing and other things, and lots of hand washing and lots of disinfectant. But I think we can and should add testing to that, and I continue to hope we get to that conclusion here quickly. We've been talking to the Air Force about a test they've been using, and I think we could partner with them in the short term and hope we figure out a way to do that.
Okay, so we're still at no resolution on that. In terms of just looking forward into your crystal ball, 2 things. This is just going to be a sort of final question. Handicap the overall Senate map, and whether or not you think Republicans can keep the majority. And then also going forward to January 20th, one of your other roles is as you get to chair the inaugural committee. Will you be, on January 20th, will you be the minority ranking member of the inaugural committee, or will you be the chair in the majority still? And will we have an inauguration that is big, outdoors, on the mall, or something smaller?
Well, I prefer to be the chair as the ranking member on the committee. And, the Rules Committee is sort of the daily operational committee of the Senate, and that particularly applies to the chair of that committee. The various, if it's a Capitol Police problem, it's my problem. If it's a cafeteria workers problem, it's my problem. If it's access to the Capitol during this time we're in right now, that's something that I'm involved in every day as the chairman of that committee. And not everybody thinks that would be the best assignment, but it's certainly does allow you every day to be in the middle of a lot of different and important discussions. I think I will be the chairman. I think we've got better candidates out there. Got a couple of races where former presidential candidates decided, well, okay, I'll do that, even though I've said repeatedly I didn't want to. In states like Montana and Colorado, one, I think candidates matter. Two, I think the candidate that really didn't want to run seldom wins the kind of bare knuckle races these Senate fights have become. I think we're going to be in the majority, but 75 days in politics is a long time, and we'd have to see what happens. In terms of the inauguration itself, I'm glad you brought that up. It's clearly something we're thinking about. I think we'll be outside unless the weather makes it impossible to be outside. And my guess is we'll be outside in some sort of socially distanced way, but I'm hoping that we can have vigorous discussions, and the person who gets inaugurated president that day, or the president who gets inaugurated for the second term, needs to have some input there, and we need to try to deal with that input. But I do think it's reasonable to assume that unless something dramatically changes, while we'll be outside, in all likelihood, it'll probably look different outside than it's looked in quite a while. But we will still be that lesson to the world of how democracies are supposed to operate. And it's a day where we project to the world who we are more and differently, I think, than we do any other time in that 4-year period of time.
Well, listen, thank you very much. That was Senator Roy Blunt coming to us from Charlotte, where the convention actually kind of took off today. Thanks for watching Washington Post Live. I'm now going to hand off to the incredible columnist Karen Tumulty, esteemed writer, who will be talking to one of President Trump's closest allies, Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Thanks, Senator Blunt. We'll see you back in the Capitol in a couple weeks.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Tumulty. I'm a columnist here at the Washington Post. I write about politics, and we're so glad that you could join us today for our conversation with Congressman Jim Jordan. Congressman Jordan is one of President Trump's closest allies, as Paul Kane just said. He represents Ohio in the Congress. He is also the ranking Republican on the Oversight Committee. So, Congressman, thank you again for joining us today. You've got a speaking part tonight. So what is it that you think you want to convey to Republicans and maybe people who are just undecided in this election on this opening night of the convention?
Karen, in spite of relentless opposition from the Democrats, from the mainstream press, and frankly, as we know, some of the never-Trumpers, this president has done exactly what he said he was going to do, delivered for the American people. That's the message I'll talk about. You think about prior to the coronavirus, taxes cut, regulations reduced, economy growing at an unbelievable pace, lowest unemployment. Just amazing results this president got. Aaron, can you hear me? I feel like there's a big echo.
Yeah, I'm sorry there. Our audio was breaking up just a little bit, which seems to happen when we're doing these things virtually. If you don't mind, you say you want to talk about the president's successes. You want to talk about what he's achieved. Do you think that is going to be the focus of this week?
Well, I think it's going to be the American people. I mean, we got Alice Johnson talking. You got Dana White talking. You got this large collection of the American people who the president's been fighting for. I think what the American people so appreciate about President Trump is this. I wish it wasn't this rare, but this rare idea that he actually has done what he said he would do. I mean, I think about out of the Iran deal, embassy in Jerusalem, hostages home from North Korea, new NAFTA agreement, all things he promised he was going to do. Conservative judges. Rebuilding the wall. Building the wall, rebuilding our economy. So I think that is a key message. What he did exactly what he told the American people he was going to work on, and he's delivered on those issues.
So this is a very unusual setup logistically for a political convention. The Republicans are trying to make it a bit of a hybrid. Part of it will be in person, part of it will be virtually. Your comments tonight, will you be delivering them live, or were they pre-recorded, as we saw so many of the speeches last week at the Democratic convention?
Yeah, it was taped. It was taped like so many. We just we did that I believe last Thursday.
Well, another thing that is sort of interesting about this convention, and I have written in the past that party platforms don't often mean a lot. They are quickly forgotten after a convention, often by the nominee himself. But the Republicans made a pretty unusual decision this year, which was essentially not to have a platform at all, essentially to go back to what you said in 2016 and just say, essentially, the agenda of the Republican Party is to support the agenda of Donald Trump. Do you think that is a wise idea?
Well, I would disagree with the premise. I think principles don't change. We're the party that believes in the rule of law. We're the party that believes in the Constitution. We're the party that believes in key institutions in our culture. We're the pro-life party. We're the party that thinks you should cut taxes, not raise them like Joe Biden wants to do. We're the party that thinks you should put conservative judges on our court system. So I don't think any of that's changed. I think we're the conservative party, and frankly, Karen, I would argue we're the pro-America party. You look at what the Democrats are allowing to happen and refuse to denounce what is going on in our great American cities. That is scary. And Bill Barr asked this question a few weeks ago in the judiciary hearing. Why won't Democrats denounce the mob, denounce the violence, denounce what is happening in our cities? Instead of denouncing it, what do? They encourage this whole defund the police concept. So I don't think the party's changed at all. Principles don't change, and we still have the same principles.
But doesn't not having a specified, spelled out set of principles that the party stands for, as parties have done every 4 years at their conventions, I mean, doesn't this sort of open you up to the idea that essentially the Republican Party has become an extension of Donald Trump?
No, the president campaigned in 2016 that he was going to cut taxes. He got elected instead, and we actually cut taxes. He said he was going to reduce regulations. He got elected and reduced regulations. When he gets reelected here in 70-some days, he's going to do the same thing in the second term. The president campaigned on the fact that he was going to put conservative judges on our federal bench. He has done that. When he gets reelected in 7 days, he will do the same thing. The president campaigned on he was going to put the embassy in Jerusalem. He did that. The president campaigned on he was going to focus on America, focus on trade deals. He got a new NAFTA agreement. He's going to continue to focus on trade deals. He's already looking to get trade agreements with India, with Japan, with the United Kingdom. So those same principles, those same ideals still apply now, and he's going to continue to do that. And he's most importantly going to continue to fight for regular Americans, regular families across this country, and do what he said he would do. That is who we are. That is who the president is. That is what he's going to continue to do. And again, I think that's why he's going to win on election day. I think that's why you saw the CBS poll just over the weekend shows he's up with independents in spite of the Democrats just having their convention. The president is up with independents. So those are all good signs. And again, I see it in Ohio. He won Ohio by 8.5 points. I think he's going to win by a larger margin on election day.
Well, of course, some of the issues that you were dealing with, the party was dealing with, all of us were dealing with in 2016. We're looking at a different set of crises in 2020. And so I think everyone's trying to figure out how to come to grips with them. You were a critic of the $25 billion Postal Service bill that passed the House on Saturday. Could you talk a little bit about that in terms of what you would have preferred to see in that, and also what your constituents are seeing in Ohio as a result of some of the things that are being done at the Postal Service?
Well, I'll come at this. What our constituents are seeing in Ohio, the president was just at the Whirlpool plant in Clyde, Ohio, in our district. What they're seeing is manufacturing on the rebound. They're seeing, this is, I believe, manufacturing's best friend, this president. When the president was there, they're going like crazy. We're seeing great results in our manufacturing sector of our economy across our state. I was in the opposite side of the state last week, Youngstown, not necessarily considered a hotbed of Republicans. There was a huge event in Youngstown. Union Democrats, now I think pro-Trump Republicans. So that's what I'm seeing across the state. This bill that the Democrats passed before they even had a hearing, which I think was, amazing. The hearing is just now finishing up. Been going on all day, but they voted on the legislation last week. Is just politics, just the latest conspiracy theory that the Democrats have. You don't have to take my words for it. That's what the Wall Street Journal said about him. So yeah, this is a ridiculous piece of legislation. The Democrats' latest attempt to go after the president of the United States.
Well, are you hearing anything from because you've got a big district, presumably a lot of people very, very dependent on the U.S. Postal Service. Are you hearing of any sorts of problems out in the, especially the sort of more rural areas of your district?
And what I'm hearing from folks in our district is they're concerned about this idea that Democrats want to mail live ballots out to every single voter. That's the world the Democrats would prefer, and that's what they're pushing for. What I hear from our constituents is they're concerned about that. In Ohio, you have to request an absentee ballot, have it sent to you, or go to the Board of Elections to vote absentee ahead of election day. We don't just in a normal course of business just mail ballots out, live ballots out. So I hear concerns about from citizens about that fact that Democrats are pushing for, and that's what this bill's about. That's what this whole conspiracy theory going after the Postmaster General is about. They got $14 billion cash on hand. They got a $10 billion line of credit. The moving of the sorting machines and changing out some of the mail collection boxes is nothing new. Every Postmaster General has done it. Between 2011 and 2016, the Obama-Biden administration moved out 12,000 mail collection boxes. But somehow, now it's a crisis because this Postmaster General is doing the same thing. We know what this is about. This is about the Democrats. I said this today in the hearing, creating chaos, creating confusion, because they know that President Trump's going to win on election day, but they want to keep counting ballots after the fact. Just like they did in Chairwoman Maloney, just like in her primary election, where the election was June 23rd, and they didn't get results until 6 weeks later. Just like what happened in New Jersey with their primary, where their election was last month, they didn't get results for 4 weeks later. Just like this different example, but I don't think it was the post office's fault. I said this in the hearing as well today. I don't think it was the post office's fault that it took a month to figure out who won the Democrat Iowa caucus. I still don't know who won. I don't know if it was, I can't even remember if they determined who won, Biden, Bernie, or whoever. So this is about chaos and confusion because President Trump's going to win on election day. They want to keep counting ballots after the fact.
But so you yourself mentioned conspiracy theories. What's the problem with taking your time to count ballots? It's, isn't that just a sign that they're trying to be careful?
What's the problem with making sure we get the ballots in on time? The Postmaster General, that's why I sent the letter out to boards of elections to Secretary of State saying, hey, why don't you make sure ballots come in on time so we can actually get a real count, get this election done on election day like we're supposed to, versus counting it after the fact? What's wrong with that? That's the way we've always done it in the United States of America. What's wrong with that?
Well, again, a lot of states have been using vote by mail pretty heavily. And for instance, in Arizona in 2018, it took a number of days to count the ballots. And in some cases, people who were in the lead on election night were not in the lead once the mail-in ballots. And so
we saw what happened with the ballot harvesting in California, Karen, how well we know. There were a number of Republicans who were way ahead, but Democrats kept counting and counting and counting, and Shazam, found a bunch of ballots. A person that we've helped in her campaign in New Mexico was declared the winner on election night. Yvette Harrell was declared the winner only a few hours later. Oh, wait a minute, we just found some ballots. And then a few days later, nope, Democrat won. So that's a concern. That's a concern. We want every legitimate ballot to be counted, of course. But do we really want it to go 6 weeks after, like in Chairwoman Maloney's case? I don't think so. You think the American people would tolerate that? 6 weeks after the election? 4 weeks after? A month after in Iowa to figure out who won a Democrat caucus where they all showed up in person? Do we want that kind of chaos?
Well, so Congressman, though, we have a situation here where there is a virus out there. A lot of people are afraid to go to the polls physically in person. A number of poll workers, they tend to be elderly, retirees, don't want to be sitting out there exposed to other people all day. What is the alternative then to using the mail and using, other less traditional means to really allow everybody to, express their, and vote in this election?
Vote safely, do it safely, but do it in person. We should still have that's the safest way. You just had on Senator Blunt. He said the same thing. The safest way, the best way to make sure you know your vote is counted is to show up in person. In Ohio, we have signature match. We have to show your ID. You show up to the people who work your precinct. My wife and I, we go to our little local township building and we vote there. That's the best way to do it. Let's do it safe, but let's do it that way. That is the safest way to make sure this election is secure and safe. I'm always amazed. I'm always amazed. Democrats are fine with protesting in person, but oh, no, we don't want you voting in person. I mean, Democrat mayors will go out and kneel down in front of the mob like Mayor Garcetti did without a mask around hundreds and hundreds of people. That's just fine. But oh, you can't go to church, you can't go to school, you can't go to work, you can't go to the beach, you can't vote in person, you can't play college football. Come on, we're talking about a presidential election year. We're talking about the importance of the election and making sure it is done fairly and right and secure. We can do it in a safe fashion and we can do it in person.
Do you have any ideas, though, for making sure, for instance, that there are enough poll workers, that people are not having to stand in extra long lines? And again, I mean, there are plenty of reasons to be concerned about that, especially if you're a senior citizen or have health issues underlying that might make you more vulnerable.
And that's why we're getting ready for it. That's why we have Secretary of States and local boards of election. They're working on that as we speak. And that's why we're preparing ahead of time. Frankly, that's why the Postmaster General sent a letter out to make sure that Board of Elections and Secretaries of State understand what's happening, make sure they're getting ready for this, and make sure they understand what the post office can and can't do.
Well, another big issue that's going to be confronting Congress in the very near future is another stimulus package to deal with the effects of the virus, to deal with the effects on the economy. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you want to see, where you think this whole thing is going?
I think the best stimulus is to go back to work. I've said it for months. We're already seeing the rebound, what I call the Great American Comeback, happening. It would happen faster if so many of these Democrat governors wouldn't keep their state on lockdown, would actually let Americans go back to work. I fundamentally disagree with this this premise that way too many folks here in Washington, way too many Democrats have adopted. This idea that somehow government cares more about the well-being of employees than the small business owner does. The small business owner cares more about his or her employees. They've trained them, they work with them every single day. Those employees are the reason their business is successful. Their kids go to school together, they go to church together. There is no way the federal government cares more about the well-being of those employees than that small business owner does. And the same goes for the customers. I always think it's amazing. The people in the federal government have all these rules and regulations and all, but the small business owner knows the customer, knows their employees. They care more about their well-being, and I just refuse it. So the best stimulus we can have is let this economy go, let it take off again, let it flourish. Don't keep holding it back. Do it in a safe way. Protect the most vulnerable in our population. Certainly, there's going to have to be accommodations, but business owners are willing to do that. But somehow, no, Democrat governors, Democrat mayors say, no, we got to keep our cities on lockdown. We got to keep our small business owners from opening their business and going back to work. That is the best stimulus. Let the American economy take off, and it'll get back to where it was. We already have businesses. We had a business in our district in the manufacturing sector tell me March was the best month in the history, 70 years in business. March was the best month in the history of their business. They said April and May, the worst 2 months. But June and July, back to the best months. When we began to reopen again, they're in manufacturing, it's taken off. If we just let things open up, you would see that happen.
But Congressman, some of the mayors in your own state have said that they really need some federal help to get through this. Are they wrong?
I think the legislation I like is the one put forward by my colleague from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, where there is over $1 trillion out there already. It was sent out in the first CARES package. Let some of that money have a little more flexibility with that money, so that money out the door for a local government, for a city or township or county that was specifically marked for direct COVID expenses, give a little flexibility there for some of the lost revenue that happened when these small business owners were shut down and the tax revenue didn't flow into the local government like it traditionally and normally would. So give some flexibility there. That's Congressman Davidson's bill. I think it makes common sense. The money's already out the door. That could be helpful to local governments. But the best thing would help local governments is what I just said. Let people go back to work, and the tax revenue starts coming back in because the economy is turning and churning. That's what we need.
Congressman, if we could switch topics here a bit, something we've been hearing a lot about in the news lately is QAnon. It's a possibly a movement, but it's based on some wacky sounding stuff about satanic cults. And you have supported at least one QAnon candidate who has won her primary and is likely to be your colleague in Congress come January. Marjorie Taylor Greene. Does her support for this bother you?
I don't even know what QAnon is. Haven't taken the time to look into it because I think it's ridiculous. But I know Marjorie Greene.
You haven't looked into it and you supported her?
No, but she's a conservative Republican. I didn't even know that that there was any talk of her linkings to QAnon or whatever. I just knew she was a conservative Republican who cares about the same things that I do, the president does, and frankly, most Americans, and certainly a majority of Republicans in her district, as evidenced by the fact that she won, and she won big. So, you guys are the ones focused on QAnon when we got other big issues that we need to be addressing. I don't even know what they're about, what they do, and frankly, don't care, because I think what little I've heard about it from you guys in the press, they seem strange to me. So, but it's not something I care about, not something I spend any time on. My job is to do what I told the voters in the 4th District of Ohio I was going to do. I focus on that every day. And over the next 70-some days, I'm going to keep talking to the families and taxpayers that I get the privilege of representing in the 4th District. And I'm going to do everything I can to help President Trump get reelected.
So let's be clear on this. So you say that when you decided to support her, and I think she got some support from other members of the Freedom Caucus as well, that you were not aware that she was embracing these kind of.
I don't know anything about QAnon. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they do. So it wasn't even an issue to me. My focus was she's a conservative candidate we thought could win that primary. We supported her, as did a whole bunch of other Republicans, again, because she won in a big way.
And can I ask you, you backed President Trump's call to boycott Goodyear, which is an Ohio-based company. And it was in part because of, I believe you said, because they were allowing their employees to wear Black Lives Matter gear. They have also said Thursday that they would also support if their employees want to wear Blue Lives Matter.
Oh,
sure.
So it's already had an impact. It's already had an impact.
So do you think the president ought to drop the boycott?
Look, I think the president said what the vast majority of the employees at Goodyear believe. The idea that your employer says, oh, this is acceptable, this isn't, we're going to infringe on your First Amendment liberties. We're going to say you can say something that we think is politically correct, but we're going to cancel your ability to speak out in another way. I just don't think that makes sense. It was interesting to me. The same day this happened, we did a op-ed in the Plain Dealer talking about the cancel culture mob and how they discriminate against conservative points of view. And then here we have this. So I think the president was speaking for the vast majority of the employees at Goodyear, for all kinds of people around this country, all kinds of people around Ohio. I think I said this earlier. He won Ohio by 8.5 points in 2016. My guess is he's speaking for a majority of Ohioans when he said that Goodyear shouldn't discriminate against points of view of their employees.
Do you think that a company has the right to prohibit their employees from wearing specific campaign gear, MAGA hats, or for that matter, Joe Biden for president shirts?
Be consistent. That's all we're saying. Be consistent. You want to prohibit it? Prohibit it. You want to allow it? Allow it all. Don't say, oh, it's okay to wear the left-wing stuff. You can't wear conservative stuff. I mean, come on. All we're saying is this is the beauty of the First Amendment. And what is so dangerous about today's cancel culture mob. You think about the world of sports. Think about what we saw in the past few months. Drew Brees says, stand for the anthem. The mob comes after him. Mike Gundy, the football coach at Oklahoma State, goes fishing with his kids, wears the wrong T-shirt, according to the left today, and he gets canceled. They come after him. He has to take it. He almost loses his job. They come after, and then James Harding wears back the blue mask or some pro police, pro law enforcement mask, and they target him, and he has to go out and deal with that. This is ridiculous, and Americans know it. But the Democrats are so afraid of the left. This is why they won't denounce. This is why they won't denounce what the mob's doing in Portland. Been doing it for 90 days. Why they won't denounce this whole defund the police concept, because they're so afraid of the cancel culture. They're so afraid of the mob. It's now part of their party. That's the scary thing. So that's what this is about. And I'm convinced the American people see through it.
Another thing that's happened recently was the release of the Senate Intelligence Committee report, which I think it showed both a little bit more about how aggressive the Russians were in trying to meddle with our election in 2016, and also a network of contacts that hadn't been revealed before with Paul Manafort, who had a high up position in President Trump's campaign. Now, this is a report that came out of a committee that is run by Republicans in the Senate. You've been a very vocal defender of the president on all of this, including on just in general, his entire approach to foreign policy. Was there anything in that report that bothered you?
No, I mean, look, because we already knew that, Russians always try to, meddle in United States affairs, just like the Chinese do. So that was nothing new. So this was, you guys. First, you put all your, you talked about the Mueller report, and the Mueller report comes out and says no collusion, no conspiracy, no coordination whatsoever. So the Mueller report was clear, but now you talk about this report. The real news the last few weeks, the real news was the fact that an FBI lawyer pled guilty to lying to a court, a secret court, the FISA court, pled guilty, and he did all that, lied to the court, the secret court, the FISA court, he did all that so they could spy on the Trump campaign. And you guys don't want to talk about that, but this report that says, some Paul Manafort talked to some Russians. We've known Paul Manafort talk to Russians forever, and he was like campaign chair for like 3 minutes of the president's campaign. So, come on, the real story in all this is Klein-Smith pled guilty, falsified a document that was taken to a court, did that for the specific purpose of being able to spy on the president's campaign. And the real story the last few months has been what they did to General Flynn, where between Election Day and Inauguration Day, 38 people 49 times unmasked his name, and they hatched this strategy in the January 5th, 2017 meeting in the Oval Office with Biden, Obama, Comey, and Yates and Rice all in that meeting to go get Mike Flynn 19 days later on June 20, 15 days later on June 20th, when they set him up and got him. The 24th. 20th was Inauguration Day.
But again, this was not the media didn't generate this report. It was your Republican colleagues in the Senate, and they did think that there was a very grave national security risk posed by the things that were happening in 2016. Is there anything do you agree with that? And is there anything that
I think the chairman, I think Mr. Rubio said the president did nothing wrong. He didn't. It said the same thing Mueller said, and we spent $40 million on the Mueller report.
But I'm asking whether Congress and whether the president ought to be doing something to prevent this from happening again.
Well, we should always be concerned about foreign entities trying to interfere with any election we're having. Just like I'm nervous about, what may happen if the Democrats get their way and send out, live ballots to everyone. So I think there's always concern. We want our elections to be safe, secure. We've talked about that. So we should always be concerned about that.
Well, yes, we certainly do hope our elections are safe and secure this time around. Congressman Jordan, unfortunately, we are out of time.
You saying they weren't last time?
I'm saying, oh, that's what I'm saying. We would like our elections this time around to be safe and secure, unlike what we saw 4 years ago.
No, I think it was safe and secure last time. You may not like the outcome, but it was safe and secure, and President Trump won, and he won with 63 million votes, and he won an electoral college landslide.
But again, the Senate Intelligence Committee report does suggest, which was put together by Republicans, does suggest that there were some real problems. But again, I guess we're not going to settle that today. But Congressman, we are unfortunately out of time. Good luck with your speech tonight, although, as you said, it was put together a few days ago. And thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you'll be back soon.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. And join us tomorrow for more Republican convention coverage. We're going to be having interviews with top officials from the Trump campaign, and you can head on over to WashingtonPostLive.com to sign up and stay with us all week, because this is really where you want to be in convention week.